Family is something that the majority of us hold near and dear, but that isn't always a good thing. For generations, people have accepted the actions of their relatives and given them a pass for no other reason than the fact that they're family, and that can get pretty toxic pretty fast. But what happens when family goes too far? What happens when family is really just an excuse for a predator to get closer to his prey? My name is Brienne, and I'm the host and creator of Among the Dirt and Trees, a show where we explore true crime cases that occur out in nature. In today's episode, we're going to discuss suspected serial killer Franklin Evans, a man who, to the shock of those around him, brutally killed his niece, but she might not have been his only victim. The year was 1872 when Georgianna Lovering went missing. In Northwood, New Hampshire, the world was a different place than the one that we know today. At only 14 years old, Georgianna was still learning about the world around her. She had her own collection of interests, and she was learning a little bit more each day. Surrounded by adults that cared for her, including a beloved grandmother who occasionally looked after her, Georgie, as she was sometimes known, was growing up in a lot of new ways at this point in her life. Unfortunately, not every adult around Georgie was interested in her well-being. One of the nearby adults watched her grow up and developed a disturbing interest in her. It was none other than her uncle, Franklin Evans. Franklin was an odd man known for his unusual interests and tendencies. Though he touted a long list of interests ranging from botany to magic and illusions, he never quite seemed to excel in any area. In fact, every time he went somewhere new, the people around him tended to determine that, for lack of better phrasing, Franklin Evans was kind of full of shit. He was a fraud. But some of the people that cared about him would look out for him from time to time. At this point in Evans' story, it was a former relative that took pity on him. His former brother-in-law, Sylvester Day, offered him a space in his boarding house with his family, and he was even kind enough to help him land a job in the area. Something tells me that if he knew what his decision would turn into, he probably would have chased Evans off his property with a gun, or worse. After some time living in his new home, Evans developed an unnatural interest in the young girl that he was boarding with. Rumors state that Evans even made an attempt to seduce her, which is disturbing for about 50 different reasons. These same rumors state that Georgianna told her family and that afterwards Evans began to treat her more kindly and with more respect. I have no doubt that Georgie thought that this would be the end of the problem, but as you might expect, it wasn't. With time, Evans' obsession with his unofficial niece began to grow, and with more time, he began to devise a plan. Evans wanted to get Georgie alone, and to do this, he set a trap. And this was a very long trap. Evans was a man with many random talents, and some were more beneficial than the rest. He began to place snares in the nearby forest, catching birds of all shapes and sizes, a fact which he hoped to use for his benefit. After he began to catch some cool birds, he would describe them to Georgie. He told her about their beauty, strength, and exciting colors. And because Georgianna was a child, a fact which did nothing to deter the interest of this much older man, she was enthralled with his tales of the birds. Eventually, she started to ask if she could see them, trusting that Evans' concerning behavior was behind them. Evans didn't want to dispel the magic of the birds, so he told Georgie that she couldn't see them. He did this to build her interest. With time, he began making small exceptions, no doubt wanting to build the idea that she was lucky and that being able to see the birds was special. After a while, he started to trust her with watching the birds while he was at work. She did this a couple of times and got kind of bored, but on a cool fall day, something changed. She told her family that she would be looking after the birds, but this time when she went out into the forest, she never came back. Initially, people suspected that she might have been lost or playing childish games, just hiding out in the woods. They figured that she would show up soon. But when she didn't show up, a search party was formed. Neighbors combed the forest hoping to find any trace of her, but what they did find wasn't good. Bit by bit, small trinkets were found that belonged to her, and eventually they found a site where it definitely looked like a pretty big struggle happened. The locals and her family began to fear the worst, but they still couldn't find her. One of the neighborhood locals felt that Evans behaved suspiciously when asked about the girl, going a little too far to prove his evidence. Police began to keep a closer eye on him, feeling like he was likely involved, and eventually, they made the decision to detain him. This led Evans to make further attempts to clear his name, and as a last-ditch effort, he actually made an attempt to sully Georgianna's. Evans claimed that his niece had run off to elope with a stranger, and that, fearing for her, he gave her money like a good uncle and took her to meet the man. He claimed that the two of them left, hoping that police would stop looking for her around the area and start searching for somebody who might be with a runaway girl. The head investigator continued to push Evans to tell the truth, and eventually, he actually did confess. He told police what he had done, and the truth was actually worse than they imagined. Evans admitted that he had tricked Georgianna into entering the forest to tend to his birds, and that he was actually there lying in wait for her when she arrived. He admitted to attacking her, and he even admitted to raping her. He told police that he panicked when she fought back, and he strangled her to stop her, fearing that she would escape. And as if that isn't horrifying enough, he told police that he used a knife to carve up her body, hoping to mislead investigators and make it more difficult to identify her. As a final attempt at getting away with it, he dumped her body in a swamp and covered her with rocks, dirt, and leaves. At this point, tensions were really high in the area. This was 1872, a time that is very different from today's world. Vigilante justice wasn't exactly unheard of, and there were a lot of people in the area that wanted to kill Evans for hurting such an innocent young girl. Evans knew this, and the police did too, which is why the lead investigator actually offered to help him. Rather than get torn apart by the masses, Evans agreed to show the police where Georgianna's body was, and as payment, Evans would be smuggled to Canada. If your first thought here is to be shocked and horrified, that is fair, but don't worry. In the same way that Evans lured Georgie to her death, police lured Evans to his, in a way. They had no intention of smuggling him out, and instead, the moment that he showed them the body, he was immediately arrested. But police did not let the people of the town have their way with Evans. Instead, he was kept hidden at the sheriff's house until the start of the trial. Evans tried to lie in court just like he lied throughout the entire ordeal, but this also didn't work. Locals in the area wanted blood, and in the end, that is what they got, in a way. While imprisoned, Evans tried to end things on his own terms, but a prison guard actually caught him before he could finish the job. He tried to use his suspenders, which actually could have been successful from what I read, but they managed to stop him so he could be sentenced. Evans was sentenced to execution, and he did die in prison. But a few more things happened before then. Stories began circling that Evans might have been involved in several other crimes involving children ranging from the age of 5 to 14. Throughout his life, Evans had a history of being in the places where children were raped and killed, and in his final confession, he actually did admit to one of the crimes that he was accused of. It involved a 5-year-old girl in Derry. Yes, Derry, like in the movie It. I also had the thought when I was reading about Georgie. But it wasn't that Derry. This was actually Derry, New Hampshire, though one of his other accused crimes did involve a child in Maine, so... Evans initially claimed that he found the girl and that she was close to death, so he decided to finish the job, planning to dissect her because of deformities that he claimed to see. And I think that we can all agree that this is certainly not normal behavior. I have cut up a good portion of the animal kingdom and worked with a few cadavers in my day, so I'm not exactly shy about dissection, but I think we can all agree that Evans did not have science on his mind. This was a sick man. He clearly murdered a child and made up a bizarre story to make it not weird, clearly not recognizing that the average person would have some hesitations about harming an innocent child and then cutting them up because they thought something might be off. Evans was hanged less than 2 years after his attack on his niece, and police still believe that he had more to confess to before he died. I have no doubt in my mind that Sylvester Day thought that he was making the right decision when he took in his former brother-in-law out of the goodness of his own heart, but really, he couldn't have been more wrong. Sometimes family, former or current, is nothing like we're taught it is. Some people use family as an excuse to harm people and get away with it. Others would easily hurt the same family members that bend over backwards to give them a hand. Really, family only means what we make it mean, and not every relative that you have is probably worthy of the title. But I think that we can all agree that, especially by 1872 standards, Evans was certainly worthy of the death sentence that he received. So, if you want to discuss birding with a total novice who knows next to nothing about it, questionable relatives, or killers getting their just desserts, you can contact me on Twitter or Instagram using the tag @datpod. Thanks, guys.